moral justification or ethical standards. Okay, as we said early on, and it's important to review how they are actually particularly uh, argued within particular tradition, and how eventually they actually have been expressed as universal claims. Okay, there are so many different ways by doing that, but I would like to map out for you this morning several ethical standards. Okay, and I'm sure, especially those who studied philosophy, okay, philosophical morality, okay, or philosophical ethics, okay, you will be able to see and appreciate that there are in fact different ways by which people come up with their own moral justification and ethical reasoning. Normally, they arise from particular questions, okay, or associated with a particular question. For example, there is a particular moral system, okay, that emerged out of a fundamental question that asks, does the action help the person perfect himself or herself as a person? So it is about self-fulfillment, okay? Uh, Developing a virtuous character. We'll explain each of these later on. But there are those who start the question not about whether a person is able to pursue his self-fulfillment or perfection, but there are moral standards that speak about whether or not our human actions or our human life conform to the moral law given by God. Okay? And we will see that many of these religious traditions would basically, revolve around this kind of ethical perspective, that our ways of appreciating what is good and what is right from what is wrong or from what is evil is very much dependent on our appreciation of God, His purpose, and His laws that He wants us all to follow in our lives. So that is another perspective. But there are those moral systems that does not start about God. In fact, they react against that, and they believe that it has to come from within, not from outside. Okay? And one example of that is the question, did the person do his duty, coming from his goodwill as a human person, doing certain actions and arguing for a particular moral system that he or she can claim that can be universally acceptable. Okay? So the universal standards become very important because of the human capacity to think, and that people can actually agree if only you belong to this, you know, particular group of people who are actually rational human beings. That is another, uh, uh, it has given way to another perspective we will elaborate in a short while. But another question, okay, in terms of determining what is right and what is good, comes from this fundamental question that asks, are the consequences of our actions good? The determination of whether what we consider as good or bad very much depends on the consequences, okay, that we speak about. For example, uh, this particular law is good because it actually promotes the common good in the interest of much greater number of population, and that a lot of more people are happier with that in terms of its consequences in their lives. Okay, we will see that question, it has given rise to another system of ethical rationality. Okay, but another one speaks about, okay, are the motivations of the person acceptable? It is not about laws per se. It is not about the consequences per se. It is not about whether the person has, he followed his duties, but it is about real his motivation, okay, as a person. Normally, for example, in courts, that is what they start with. The question that they ask, why did does this person have any motivation to kill that person? Okay, the culprit, as the culprit who is allegedly being, accused, does he have the motivation to do what it did? And that is important. Okay, but another question that has given rise to another system, ethical system, is actually the question we ask: does the action help liberate himself or herself or others in pursuit of his authentic freedom as a person? You can see that there are a lot of moral systems that have emerged in society, but they basically start with either one of these questions. Is that clear to you? Okay, let's take a look at each of this. Okay, the first is, does the action of the person perfect himself or herself as a person? And this has given rise to what we refer to now as virtue ethics. In Greek system of morality, basically it was Aristotle who expounded on this, that has given rise to a particular system. What is there in virtue ethics that makes a person respond to the question of self-fulfillment, okay, and self-perfection as a person, okay? The assumption is of Aristotle is that the human person actually, as he or she is a raw material. We are all born to be, we are all born as human persons. Okay? Pinanganak tayong lahat na tao. You understand? Ang tanong,
Yes.
ikaw ba'y nagpapakatao? The question is, are you really becoming the person that you really are called to be, essentially, as a human person? That is the whole question. So, morality and a moral system should be able to ensure that the person in his raw material will eventually transform himself to becoming the person that he or she should be, okay, when he or she is able to realize his or her end or telos. And that is the only way by which you can say, wow, the person has really become a human person because he has been able to achieve his end as a person. For example, what do you see? You see a ball pen. You ask yourself, is this a good pen or a bad pen? When do you say that this is a good pen?
When it writes,
When
it
it
serves its
writes
purpose.
and when it serves its purpose, when it is able to realize the very end for which it exists, isn't it? And what is its end? That it is able to be used to write. When it cannot write, when it cannot produce ink, then you call this a bad pen, isn't it? Do you understand?
Yes,
So
Father.
it is able to achieve its quality of goodness because it is able to perfect and realize its purpose for its own existence. Do you understand? In the same way that the human person
Yes,
actually
Father.
born as a human being, as man, is able to become the person that he is supposed to be, but that is an essentialist claim, okay? Supposed to be when he is able to realize his end. For example, what is the end of man? Peter, what do you think is the end of man by which When you are able to achieve that, you can say, well, that is a good person. What is the end of man?
For me, but the, 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 the end of the man is achieve his own human dignity to be a fully person, fully a human as he is.
And what does it mean to be a fully human person? That he is not animalistic, but is actually, a rational human being, okay? Rational animal. How would you characterize that person who has been able to realize himself?
Somehow you can follow your reason to do what is right and what's wrong, and put aside our feeling and our emotion to that we can follow our reason to do what we really want to think is the good for our life, not behave like an animal, like live by our emotion or something like that.
Okay, so it basically is understood, our response to this is understood in how we understand philosophical anthropology. Okay? You're familiar with how Aristotle in Nicomachean Ethics speaks about man. What is the constitution of a human being? That a human being has what? Has body, it has soul, okay? Spirit, okay? But basically, according to his hylomorphic, okay, constitution of man, okay, of human being, it is actually a combination of matter and form. And what is the combination of matter and form? It is about the human body, but at the same time, you have the soul, okay, that embodies the human body, okay? And what is the end of the soul? The soul has two important faculties. The soul has mind. And what is the end of the mind? To pursue the truth, isn't it? Is that clear? And what is the end of the will? Is to be able to pursue the good. Is that clear?
Yes, Father.
So the will only and can only have the good as its end. Okay? Of course, you now talk about formal, formal, formal and material object, for example. The formal truth, the material object is that the objective reality there is actually appreciated as is, okay? That is the material object, and the formal object is actually truth. That we are able to draw out from that material appearing object, and we are able to abstract the truth from that. If you're familiar with the epistemology, ideogenesis, excuse me, sisters, for these terms, but our philosophy students, are familiar with the ideogenesis. What do you mean by that? What is the source, or what is the origin of our knowledge of the truth? It is always through a process of abstraction of the truth from the material object. That when the mind is able to abstract the truth from the objective reality and define it, and that the mind conforms perfectly well with its appreciation of reality, then you have the truth. Then you have the formal. And then, of course, he talks about a very you know you know very well the description of that ideogenesis. I know I know an object and I'm able to abstract that, but it starts from my experience through the senses. I can see it, I can touch it, I can smell it, I can hear it, I can taste it. That is the reality. And our knowledge of that objective reality somehow is abstracted. And then we will say, is this an apple? Okay?
Yes.
You are presented with the material object, and when you make a declaration, it's an apple. This is already an abstraction that draw out from that material objective reality. Do you understand? And that when you're able to say, well, my own analysis of the object conforms to my mind, then I'm able to come up with truth in the determination of that object. The object could be God, okay, in our pursuit. And then you begin to experience, and then through your sensory means, and then you come up with that abstraction, and you say, that is the truth. You understand? So a person is able to realize himself first by allowing the faculty of the mind to pursue it then. You understand? And a person is able to realize himself when the will is able to really take hold of the good, and it is able to live his life according to the determination of what is good. Do you understand? The will is a blind faculty according to Aristotle. Okay? It only pursues what is good as it is presented with the mind to the will. It is the mind that makes the determination whether that object that the will is confronted with is good or bad. Sometimes, okay, the will always pursues that. Sometimes the will, in a way, because of the analysis and limited appreciation of the mind, is not able to really present the good. What is authentically good? The mind can tell the will, oh, that is good, she's a beautiful woman, etc. etc. Okay? And then the will pursues that. But the mind does not realize or is not able to inform the will that you have already your wife to whom you are supposed to be faithful. Etc. So there is a kind of a distortion in the presentation of the good for the will to pursue. But the real, for Aristotle, the will cannot not only have the good as its object in the way it is perceived and as it is presented with the mind. Do you understand? So if, for example, the mind and the will is able to pursue its end, which is truth and goodness, then you can most likely say that the person is able to realize his telos. Okay? Or the body also is able to realize its end, which is actually health. Okay? And so all of this depends on the level of your appreciation of the reality out there. Okay? And your own appreciation of your telos. If your telos is very myopic, then uh, it may not necessarily represent the totality of your fulfillment as a human person. Okay? You are only going to be the kind of person in that little way. But if your telos goes beyond, okay, a much bigger reality, especially according to God's own purpose, and then you would be able to say that you can speak about ultimacy of reality. Okay, when Aristotle talks about the greater ultimate end of the good, okay, is your happiness. Okay, and that when you become happy because you are able to realize your end as a human person, then you are able to achieve your end. But how do you do that? According to Aristotle, you are able to pursue your end, especially by way of living virtuous lives. Okay? Your mind has to have wisdom to be able to really pursue what is authentically true, that you are not cheated, that you are not deceived by reality. But you are so wise that you can clearly see what is really the truth. Okay? And that your will to be able to experience real authentic freedom and pursuit of the end which is good. How? By developing virtuous character that you should be able to overcome your fear and become a person with courage and fortitude. So you know that end is good, Some people are afraid because there may be some difficulties that may come along the way. And so if they don't have the virtue of courage, they will not be able to go on and pursue it. And that therefore they are not able to realize themselves. You understand? Or for example, you have some end, for example, of the good of the will, and then you want to be honest, and be able to be faithful to your wife or to your vocation, and yet, you are driven by your concupiscence, by your passion, by your emotion, and that therefore, because if you don't have a virtue, you would just give in and not remain faithful to what you have committed yourself to, because you don't have the virtue of continence, because you don't have the virtue of that kind of, of discipline, mortification, etc. Okay? So do you get my point? Therefore, for one person to become happy and realize his ultimate end, which is happiness, that person should be able to develop a virtuous life. Okay? One that is able to govern his mind, one that is able to govern his will through constant repetitive practices, that in such a way that they become second nature to you already as a person. Okay? Is that clear? When you do that, and when you succeed in doing that, okay, you achieve eudaimonia, well-being, or happiness. And he refers to this as human fulfillment as a human person. Is that clear? I hope it's clear with you. Yes. Yes, do you have questions? Okay, if there are no questions, we'll move on. So that is about narrative ethics or virtue ethics. That the story that you write about yourself actually brings you a realization on who you are called to be.
Ayan mo siya.
Of,
Okay lang sa akin.
of course, some criticize this because it assumes that you can actually speak of the person in an essentialist way, that you have already a defined identity that you should have as a person, because there is already a presupposition. Of course, this is something that existentialists would raise critical questions against, because in existentialism you are born to life without yet any essence. You're only thrown to your world of existence, and that you make you and define your own essence according to your own free choice, determining your own authentic self, okay, in the process. So the existentialism, in a way, is critical of this precisely because it has a lot of metaphysical presuppositions. What do you mean by that? It actually presumes that there are given essences that we need to follow and to be in order to claim that we in fact are able to fulfill ourselves, and that we are able to become happy, okay, through experience of self-fulfillment, okay, as a person. Is that clear? I hope it is. Then we move on. Another question, okay, that is actually put forward in coming up with moral justification and ethical perspective is one that arises from a question: does the action or does the form of life conform to the moral law given by God? What would you identify it with when you talk about laws of God? You refer to divine law ethics, okay? That the determination of the quality of life that we can pursue very much depends on what God has revealed to us in terms of laws, in terms of norms that we should be able to follow in our life, individually and collectively in society. Okay? And this is very much articulated in the Jewish and Christian moralities. Okay, you remember the Ten Commandments that God gave to Moses to serve as guide for the newly constituted nation. Okay, it was able to establish at the foot of Mount Sinai. Okay, so people should be able to follow the law of God if they were to be faithful to Him, and in a way pursue their themselves according to God's own end. So here, the presupposition is that we can speak of a divinely created order, okay, with some purposes, with a purpose for all the things that God created. You would refer to this as presuming a kind of a blueprint that God actually had in designing the universe. He created, for example, okay, the whole world and everything on it according to his very beautiful designs, and that we actually are able to discern through the natural laws of things, isn't it? That, for example, animals are there, okay, and plants are there. There is a sea, and each of these would have a function. Of course, for some time, humanity thought that all of this, the purpose of God for all of this is only to serve human needs. But more and more now, we realize that God's purpose for all of this is not really just about, you know, meeting human needs, but you actually speak of this as part of the cosmic order that we should be able to respect, okay, maintain, and take care of, etc. Here you talk about also the revealed laws in the Torah, okay, which became eventually the basis of that covenantal relationship between God and his people. Okay? I will be your God, and you will be my people. And since you are my people, later on you will study in your biblical studies that this whole setup of the covenantal relationship is very much based on the suzerainty treaty between the king and the people. Okay? So it's like an arrangement. Okay, I'll take care of you. You're my people. I'm going to ensure that you are protected from all the enemies, but you have to be able to recognize me as your king, which means that you have to pay taxes to me, that you have to be able, to do everything uh, following your own obligations and following the laws that are imposed upon you. That was a kind of arrangement. Okay? And so that was more or less similar with God, how God instituted that fundamental relationship he had with the people of Israel. Okay, now move on. Justice. You could discern in this whole vision or morality coming from God as paying special attention, okay, to what is just. Okay, the divine order of things is designed in such a way that there will be harmony, that there will be peace, there will be justice, there will be real uh, fraternity, okay, among uh, members of the community, and that those who experience weakness, those who experience marginalization, will have to be lifted up, to be supported, okay, to be sustained, so that you can see that in the biblical tradition, you will always have a call for justice for the weak, for the oppressed, and even for the strangers. We will elaborate on this later on. Okay? So here, there is an emphasis on appointed authority to actually, in a way, discern, can crystallize divine purpose. It could be associated with the church or with the moral authority of the time. But, you know, the whole society is governed by the law of God. In political terms, some societies would refer to this as theocracy. Okay, early part of Judaism was theocratic. Okay, because people are ruled not according to their agreements, but according precisely to the laws that come from God. In Islamic tradition, they actually believe that God has set norms that should be made available and be followed in society. For example, they talk about Sharia law, and that should be obeyed, followed by the citizenry. Of course, we have very few countries who adopt theocratic system. When you say theocratic system, it is not democratic, it is not aristocratic, it is not monarchic, but it is actually theocratic. It is God who rules through his representations on earth. Okay, in that case, the political leaders or the religious leaders of the time. Example in Iran, okay, that is theocracy. Okay, let's move on. Of course, by the way, okay, we will see that uh, Thomas Aquinas, inspired by this vision, okay, of God's own purpose, was able to connect this with the Aristotelian project. Okay, and then he says when he baptized Aristotle, he started to talk about happiness, which is the ultimate end of man. Okay, the summum bonum is actually associated with God. That perfect happiness could be achieved when you're able to really dwell and have your fundamental, ultimate reality, who is God in your life. And that your virtues, he began to talk about theological virtues, but for you to be able to achieve your ultimate end, who is God, then you have to be able to have theological virtues that orient your life to God: faith, hope, and charity. And that you should be able to govern your life according to the cardinal virtues. All of this we will study later on. Okay? To be able to precisely develop a virtuous character, okay, based on what God expects of us to become human beings, living our life according to his purpose. Then there is another system that emerged out of that fundamental question